What is this Idle No More movement and why are the Indians protesting the government of Canada?
The Idle No More movement is in response to the federal government of Canada, led by Stephen Harper and his utter disregard for parliamentary procedure, the duty to consult Aboriginals over legislative change that could be detrimental, not only to Indians, but also non-Indians in Canada and infringe upon constitutionally entrenched rights. In fact, the Prime Minister clearly has his own agenda and there is not much stopping him from implementing whatever policy he feels is acceptable for Canada. Moreover, some of the proposed legislative changes may be unconstitutional and conflicts with the guarantees within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Prime Minister is making a mockery of the Canadian federal system of government and his complete disregard for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Constitution Acts should be major cause for concern for all Canadians, and this is possibly the prelude to a much bigger Canadian constitutional crisis.
What? You mean this Idle No More movement also affects the non-Indians within Canada? How can this be, and why would the Prime Minister be motivated to disregard parliamentary procedure? Rather, precedents of the duty to consult with Aboriginals?
There is no simple answer to this question, but the dialogue is much larger than the present Idle No More movement and has its roots dated back to the Royal Proclamation, 1763, subsequent parliamentary enactments, such as the Constitution Act, 1867 and Indian Act as a result of Section 91, subsection 24 of the Constitution Act, 1867, which states, Indians, and lands reserved for the Indians, is default responsibility of the federal government, complete authority over the nature and relationship of Indians and the Crown to the federal government. Now, this may not seem unreasonable at first glance. However, I assure you, this is quite the contrary and effectively defaults the Canadian Indian problem as a sole responsibility of the federal government and resulted in the enactment of special legislation to deal with the Indian problem. The Constitution Act, 1867, Section 91 and subsection 24 is important as this establishes the nature of the relationship between the Crown and Indians.
What do you mean Section 91, subsection 24 of the Constitution Act, 1867 sets parliamentary supremacy over the Indian problem and results in default authority and responsibility of Indians to the federal government?
Within the Constitution Act, 1867. Section 91 and 92 are the federal division of powers, and anything not covered under either section's exclusively authority is subject to the power of good government procedure, which states whatever is not covered within each section 91 and 92 is the default responsibility of the federal government. Although this power of good government may not seem important for this subject, it is of significant importance to further understand the federal division of powers. Section 91 of the Act is exclusive authority of the federal government, whereas Section 92 is exclusive jurisdiction of the individual province or territory. Basically, the federal government assumes full responsibility for the Indian problem and merely outlined parliamentary procedure of who has responsibility of Indian affairs, thus requiring a legislative enactment that is specifically geared towards the Indian problem.
Wow! This relationship between Indians and the Crown is completely ridiculous. How did the subsequent enactment of the Indian Act result in the, now, historical context of the Canadian Indian problem?
With the enactment of the Indian Act, the federal government, on behalf of the Crown, sought to enter into peace treaties with the Indians. However, subsequent agreement of individual Indian bands resulted in specified and federally sanctioned lands that are designated for the exclusive use of the Indian. Moreover, this land was unsuitable for the Indian to adequately gain a livelihood off the land as the federal government had promised the Indians. For example, the designated lands for Indians are agriculturally worthless and the best lands were set aside for the European settlers to farm, and Indians were restricted to their designated lands as was mutually agreed between the Crown and Indians. As you can imagine, the Indians did not fare so well and slowly lost their way of life due to the restrictive nature of the Indian Act and reservation system.
Okay. But how does this relate to the Idle No More movement and protesting of proposed enactments which could result in significant change that may be unconstitutional?
You see, my dim-witted friend, The current Idle No More movement is a result of 140 years of oppressive subjugation of the Indian by the Eurocentric colonizers. There is no simple answer, or one specific answer, but an amalgamated and compounded situation to merely deal with the Indian problem. There has never been one specific answer, only band-aid fixes to appease the current state of affairs faced by the Indians. This has resulted, compounded, in fact, snowballed into a much larger societal concern that was once able to be dealt with by the federal government of the time but now has resulted in such inherent problems within all current acts enacted to deal with the Indian problem. No longer can band-aid remedies be used to pacify the snowballed Indian problem within Canada. Effectively, this has been the relationship between the Indians and Crown since 1867 and has gone from bad to worse. Also, this has resulted in many misconceptions within society and has divided Indians and non-Indians within Canada.
You said this had resulted in many common misconceptions within modern Canadian society? What does this mean and how does this affect the current state of Indian affairs and the Idle No More movement? I do not understand. This seems completely ridiculous, and why has the federal government not effectively dealt with the legitimate concerns of the Indians?
From Confederation until the mid-1980s, the federal government of Canada was not concerned with the well-being of Indians. But, as Canada developed as a technological superpower, rivaling that of America, Canada was hard-pressed to deal with the problems in our own backyard but at the same time presenting a facade that was acceptable for the rest of the world to see. However, due to the snowball effect of the Indian problem, this resulted in substandard conditions for the Indian, total, or rather, nearly total loss of culture and the repugnant conditions on Canadian reservations faced by the Indian. Also, this has led to the much-heated non-Indian debate of Indian governance and misunderstanding of how rampant corruption came to be on the reservation system.
This is incredible. If what you are saying true, I think I need a break to get my head around these hard facts of the sinister nature of the Crown and Indians' relationship. I guess I would be super pissed too if I was subjected to these third-world conditions in a first-world country where I am blamed for the perpetual conditions I am faced with. Now, things are starting to make sense. The Indians are pissed off about the entire context of the utter disregard for Indians by the Canadian federal governments. Wow. You fantastic fellow.
Indeed. Agreed. I could use a strong drink and a little downtime too. But, if you have any more questions about the Crown-Indian relations and the present Idle No More movement, we will have to continue this conversation later and consider even greater dialogue up until the late 20th century.